So, have your child ever fallen and bumped their head? I'm sure that that's happened. The question is, are you missing anything? Are you aware of what are the red flags of a concussion? Well, you're in luck. Today, I am Dr. Ingrid Lorenzana, and I'm joined by my colleague and friend, Dr. Gall. We are here to share with you what the red flags of concussions are. Through our little informative webinar, Dr. Gall and I are excited to share what are the things that you need to be looking out for when this does happen to your child. We're going to talk about diagnosis, treatments, and strategies of how to take care of your child if they are having the impact of a concussion. Take it away, Dr. Gall. What are we going to learn today?
Well, we're going to learn lots, but first, a big gratitude thank you for joining us here. What you will learn is that neurovision optometrists like Dr. Lorenzana and I can precisely diagnose concussion dysfunctions that is often missed by brain scans like CT scans and MRIs. Now, not to worry, all this information will be available to you in an ebook at the end of the webinar and available for you. All the information is very easy and simple to understand and offer the best care for your children you take care of, or even yourself. Dr. Lorenzana, let's get into it.
And yes, I forgot to mention, one of the great things is people can leave us a comment below. We have a list of red flags for people to monitor for in the event that, in addition to the ebook.
Good. Yep. So small falls, big impacts. Pediatric concussion webinar host. Here we are, Dr. Gall and Dr. Lorenzana. There's going to be 5 big areas that we're going to cover off. Understanding concussions, why do they matter? How do you spot them? Are there red flags? Prevention and treatment for concussions. And finally, a personal action plan to be your best and help your children to be their best. So the first one is understanding concussions and acquired brain injury, particularly in children.
So one of the things we ask is try to give you the analogy that do you have a digital device? And of course you do. You have your cell phone, you have your computer. And for these devices to operate, they need a connection. And that connection is necessary so that the apps can be operated on that device. And so we also understand, we're deeply immersed in this, so we also understand that if our device or our connection doesn't work, we are unable to run the apps. And then what happens is we try, and that's when we get the buffering, the loading, we become frustrated, and we're not able to do anything that we need to do.
Yeah, and that brings us to Bobby's story. He was in first grade, really struggling with reading, writing, and behavior. Been going on for a while. He tried occupational therapy for a year. The OT hit a plateau in the therapy, but saw that Bobby's eyes weren't tracking well. And the OT thought, could it be vision? Could vision be the culprit? And so that brings us to point 1, that young children are developing. They're much different than adults. They're developing, they're learning. The train is on this developmental train, and when the tracks get mucked up, the train slows down, doesn't work, and we slow the processing of learning and developing. So small bumps are big deals for young kids.
And so to add to Dr. Gall's point is that children are in a developmental phase. This is the reason why it's important for them to be evaluated by a pediatric optometrist, because the pediatric optometrist has additional training to be able to look at that developmental aspect of vision, and if that's synchronizing along with the development of the child in the brain. And so this is further supported by research that comes from the Center of Child Development out of the Harvard University, where they are showing us through their research that vision is so fundamental, foundational to child and brain development, that it shows that as soon as children are born, the very first one of the senses that needs to be up and running is the visual system. And that sets the tone that when vision develops, then the brain will start to receive the information that it needs for that brain and that child to develop. This is part of the reason why we say that a child's first eye exam should be at 6 months. And that's for that exact reason. We want to make sure vision is developing to set the tone for the child and the brain development. And so bringing it back to the analogy that I gave you earlier, vision is that critical to the brain's information. Vision is responsible for 90% of the brain's information. So when the visual system develops as it should, and it's sending the right signals to the brain, it sets the tone that the brain and the child will develop appropriately, and they will be able to do the things they need to do. The same thing like with our devices, that if for one reason or another, the connection, the eye-brain connection, the visual pathways are not developing as they should, that's going to slow down the development of the child as well as the development of the brain overall. So our brain, we have to think about it like our personal device. It too needs that connection, which is the eye-brain pathway, the visual system, in order for it to operate and do the things that we need to do. And so that's why the research, again, supports that when you are impacted by a brain injury, one of the types is the concussion, then even if you've never had a vision disorder, you will now have a 90% likelihood that you will develop a visual disorder. That's point number 2, that the visual pathways being the same as the brain and the brain being impacted, then the visual processing specifically is what ends up creating the struggles for the brain to not be able to do the things it needs to do.
Right. And so that falls back onto Bobby's story. That little 1-year-old or grade 1er was struggling in school. So he actually fell off the high chair at age of 3 and bumped his head. A short-term owie, but has long-term consequences as time is revealing. And so the point is that concussions can affect you in the short term, but have long-term detriments. And then point 4, vision testing is much more precise and accurate to get a diagnosis of a concussion dysfunctions over any kind of brain scans like CT scans or MRIs. It's really not a physical change in the brain, but more of the processing. And the processing, the proxy of the processing is the visual processing skills, are called visual distortion patterns. So visual signs are most sensitive. Dr. Lorenzana?
Thank you. That brings us to point number 5, which one of the thoughts is, or one of the myths is that, well, my child didn't bump their head, so there's no likelihood that they had a concussion. And in reality, again, because these are developing brains, they're more sensitive to any type of interaction. And so in particularly, it's the back and forth jugging of the brain that becomes the real issue in a developing brain. And we've put the butter here because this is one of the great analogies given from Dr. Amen from the Amen Clinic. He talks about how the consistency of the tissue of the brain is very similar to butter. So visualize butter getting shooken up inside a jar, jar being analogous to that hard bony skull, that's what happens to the brain. And so that's part of the reason that butter would get dented. So in our brain tissue you get dents, small dents, they're very microscopic. That's part of the reason why they're not detected through the MRI. They're not large enough for that to be seen. And so there's many reasons why you can develop and acquire brain injury. So the acquired brain injury is the umbrella that we use to refer to 3 main types of categories of events that can happen to cause the brain to not be able to be optimized in the best way possible. I like using the analogy of the 3 T's, which I've learned from my chiropractic colleagues: thought, trauma, and toxin. Thought being anything that has to do with psychological types of trauma, socioeconomic types of environments, hostile types of home environments. Trauma is the actual physicalness, that something impacted the brain directly, which is the type that we're focusing on our webinar today. And toxin is anything that you have ingested or that the brain or you have been exposed to. So these are all different types of things that can impact the function of the brain, things that we're not born with, that's why they're acquired. And then again, for the purposes of our webinar today, we're specifically focusing on the trauma, specifically to children. As a matter of fact, the most common cause of brain injury is the fall. And the most common emergency room visit is 4-year-olds and under. And another one of those beliefs is that, concussions are only consequential to athletes. And in reality, no, it's an everyday life event. It makes sense that it happens to the 4-year-olds and under because they're clumsy. They're still learning how to navigate and move in their space, learning how to ride the bike, all those types of things. But these are the ones that we're focusing on today.
Right. So now we're on to the second area. Why do concussions matter? And as we go into point or section 2, you kind of understand concussions are a big deal. Let's talk more about it. So we get to point 6. Why do concussions matter? They impact every aspect of life, particularly for those 19 and under. It's the largest cause of disability and some deaths. So very significant. And here you can see Health Canada and the Association of America, the Brain Injury Association of America, shows the risk of concussions and the higher impact of multiple concussions. So the second one gives you more visual dysfunctions and other performance issues in life, and they're compounding. And so the importance of this is they're compounding, but then you want to have it diagnosed and then treated successfully, and that gives you a buffer protecting you against further concussions.
And so even if, one of the things that, another part of that is that even if you're feeling like, well, I'm not having any symptoms or anything like that, one of the big long-term consequences is a shorter life expectancy and also the lower quality of life from that shorter life expectancy, because you're at higher risk of developing other types of neurodegenerative types of conditions. And here you can see the list. And so then the other thing of that becomes really important is what are the red flags and how do we spot them? And yes, of course, we're talking a lot about vision today, but one of the things that I think is really important to discern is that when we talk about vision, we're not just talking about, is my child seeing clear or is their vision blurry? Things like, I can't understand what I read, I forgot what I read, I'm losing my concentration. Those too are vision problems. And very often these types of vision problems get mislabeled as maybe a cognitive problem. And it is a cognitive problem. But again, it's the apse of the brain. And that happens because that visual processing is impacted from the concussion. So the information can't get into the brain. So that connection is not working. And then therefore the brain can't run the apps like read, write, concentrate, pay attention. And so we know that when, depending on the age, children are either more or less likely to report the incident, or younger children are more likely the same. We're talking younger, maybe like first and second graders and below. They're more likely to say, I fell and I bumped my head, I got an owie. Whereas as they start to get older and they now become more in middle school or high school, and they participate more in competitive sports, they're more likely to be saying, oh, it was just another bump on the head, and they might not report it as much. We know that institutions will have a 97% return to play policies in place, but most of them only have about 63% of return to learn policy in place. And some of the theories are that some of these kids, because if they want to get back into the sport, either they think it's part of the routine of the sport, or they also may think that they don't want anything to report anything that might keep them from participating in the sport again.
Good. So we want to learn now about prevention and treatment options. When you're diagnosed with a concussion, we look for treatment. We have a high rate of success. However, it's through a multidisciplinary team. There's many factors in there: chiropractors, physiotherapists, massage specialists, medical doctors, and neurovision optometrists. So we're one piece of the puzzle. In this picture, we're just a little piece, but we think we're a bigger piece because 90% patients with concussions, 90% of the dysfunctions are vision related. And so it gets us to point 7, that vision function is brain function. And vision should always be evaluated, particularly the processing speed. And that's just that we all have a visual distortion pattern. Some are insignificant, don't really affect life, but those are raised to a higher level with a concussion, and that can limit your performance in life. And so the goal is to boost the eye-brain connection for faster processing and better performance in life.
And so then what are the strategies that we recommend that you start to do in order to, incorporate prevention? The very first one is, of course, we've already said it, book your pediatric eye exam. Ideally, the first one should be at 6 months, and establishing those baselines is really important. This becomes even more critical if your child is someone who actively participates in sports, because that automatically is going to put them at higher risk. And that's one of the great ways to know what's happening, because if you have a baseline and then now you have an incident, you can go back and remeasure those visual functions and see if they're still at the same level or if they have deteriorated. And again, these are more sensitive means than what an MRI would have detected. In addition to that, we know that when a child or anyone needs neurovisual rehabilitation, there's a 90% success rate of that having better outcomes, evidence-based outcomes. And so then what we want to do is then how do we come up with our personalized action plan? The very first thing, again, can't beat the drum too much on that aspect of we should book that pediatric visual exam. And, even aside from the concussion piece, we've already made the point that vision is what drives child and brain development. So just even for that point alone, you want to make sure that vision is at the right timing and sequencing of its development to set the sequence going forward. Second is if your child falls. I wish I knew this. My kids are all adults now, but I wish I would have known that when my child falls, I should keep track of when they fall. When did it happen? How it happened? What did we do for it? And this becomes really important because of that long-term consequence, right? The acute phase is my head hurts or I have a red bump, but the long-term phase is now I'm struggling in school, like we saw with Bobby's story. And unless you're keeping track of this, you won't know to connect those two events that are separated by 1 or 2 years later. Number 3 is definitely know the red flags. Even if you haven't been paying attention to them, the best way to become aware of them is know what it is. So then now you know that when you see it, you're like, oh, that may be a vision problem, and it'll prompt you to go ahead and do that. And then definitely, again, the point of that if your child is in sports, definitely setting up those baseline evaluations. There's more and more evidence testing, especially one new one. We call it a biomarker for concussion testing, is digital pupillary test. So checking how the pupils are responding to light. That's one of the very simple tests that can be happening. And then definitely just for overall child development and well-being, you want to be exercising all of those brain healthy types of lifestyle things, right? So the nutrition, making sure you're eliminating toxins, whether it's from food that has a lot of preservatives or that are non-organic, making sure that you do take supplements, the right types of supplements, healthy sleeping, healthy hydration, exercise, all those types of things that are going to keep your child healthy and their brain developing healthy. And then finally, in the event that if your child does have any of the red flags and they're going through the recovery, is communicating with the school to make sure that you have these systems in place to help support, not just at home, but also in the school environment, the recovery phase of your child.
Excellent, Dr. Lorenzana. So we've covered off a lot of information. I'm going to review it here in 6, 7 points. But remember, you're going to receive an ebook on Small Falls, Big Impact that has lots of information, easy reading, and can be referenced in the future at any time. So reviewing our key points, concussions have a deeper impact on children. Why? Because they're developing. And when the train gets derailed, then all the processing are slowed, and then over time, long-term detriments, particularly for learning at school. When you have a concussion, 90% of the patients have significant visual distortion pattern, things that limit their performance in life, vision related. And again, concussions have early, the OWI, and long-term consequences, particularly as life gets more visually complex in this digital age. Essentially, if you don't have concussions, you can live longer and live better. Conversely, if you do have a concussion and you boost your neural vision reserves, you actually be better than you were before the concussion. Point 4, neurovision testing is much more sensitive and precise to diagnose concussions compared to brain scans like CT scans or MRIs. And the concussions go far beyond the direct head bump. There's a coup, counter coup, which is the head rebounding off inside the skull. And there's also torque injuries if you're hit from the side with a helmet or a basketball, or you get twisted. It twists your brainstem, which is the switchboard panel for all the connections of the brain, and that can really mess up processing. Number 6, it has a significant impact on young lives, particularly those under 19, as a first cause of disabilities and can even cause death. Brain function is vision function. It's the eye-brain connection. And that eye-brain connection gets less efficient with a concussion, yet can be boosted with the right cognivision training. Finally, create a personal action plan to be able to take care of your young ones or even yourself if you've had a concussion.
Excellent. So we've come to the end of our presentation. Here's Dr. Gall and mine's contact information. You can leave us the comment of ebook. You can also leave us the comment of red flags, or directly contact us if you have any further questions of how we can support you in our local communities. Do you have anything to add, Dr. Gall?
I'm just grateful that you've joined us and that you're here for a reason. You want to live your best life and you want your children to live their best life, and we can offer the best vision care for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much.